lunch to join us to discuss this very timely topic of remote interviews. Just to kind of introduce us as an organization, we are the Personnel Testing Council of Northern California, or PTC-NC, and this webinar is going to be focused on considerations and best practices surrounding remote interviews and what's involved with that. So move on. A little bit more about PTC-NC, or our association. We are a group of personnel and selection related professionals, professional association that conducts many public and private sector assessment and selection related forums and discussions. We hold seminars featuring top professionals in the field of selection and management and industrial organizational psychology. Some of you in the audience today may have attended. Sorry, so looks like I'm getting muted here. We held a conference last year with some top professionals, including Scott Highhouse, for those of you familiar with the field of industrial organizational psychology. And we hope to continue to hold more of these forums in the future. We'll have an opportunity for those of you who are interested to register at the end of this webinar. And then for our association, we do have other events that we plan to hold later on in the year. Due to COVID-19, though, we're having some discussions about whether or not to hold these in person or remotely. But for those who are interested, if you guys want to quickly just skim through the list near the bottom of the slide there, those are the different topics that we traditionally speak on, and you guys will join us in discussing these topics later on in the year and in the months to come. And today we will have two presenters and myself as moderator. And I wanted to quickly introduce everyone that you'll be hearing from today before we get started. I'm George Avalos, the moderator. I am a part of the Department of Justice. I manage the assessment consultation team. And my team basically provides consultation on pre-employment assessments throughout the department. And one of the services that we've been helping with for our department is, guidance on, remote hiring and things of that nature. And so that along with just PTC-NC, we decided to kind of use that to jumpstart this discussion. A little bit more. I'm a former PTC president, and I presented at last year's conference, and I have a master's in IO psychology from Sac State, and have roughly 7 years of experience in the field of selection with the state of California. The other presenter today is Layla Najmi. She is with the California Public Utilities Commission, and she is the classification and hiring chief. And she has over 25 years of experience in the private sector and public service at the county, state, and federal levels. Lastly, we have Jason Underwood, the other presenter. He is an assessment consultant on my team, also at DOJ, and he has experience in job analysis, test development, and validation in both private and public sectors, and has experience with testing research and presenting at regional conferences such as WPA, or the Western Psychological Association. And before we get into the actual presentation, I just wanted to note a few housekeeping points just to make sure we can run this webinar as smoothly as possible. The first point is to make sure you keep your microphones on mute and to keep your video disabled. I was able to observe a few people kind of struggling with keeping their mics off here. Given the number of people, it's critically important that we have the microphones off, so we're able to hear the content and make sure everyone is not disadvantaged by having mics on that are going to distract from the content. So let's please try to keep our mics off. If there's any questions for the presenters, go ahead and put that into the chat function. We'll do our best to keep an eye on that chat and address those questions in the designated Q&A section of the presentation. So go ahead and put in your chat. One of the PTC members and myself will be keeping an eye on the chat, and we will collect those and address those in the Q&A section. And so please just reserve, oops, I'm sorry, Jason, I think there's one more bit. I'll address the questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. Never mind, Jason was on top of that. I already covered that. So getting down to business, the goal of this webinar, as I alluded to earlier, is basically to go over the remote interview process and everything involved with that. Many organizations, as I'm sure many of you were motivated to join us because you guys are scrambling to figure out how to conduct remote interviews and assessments in a virtual setting as opposed to meeting in person to practice social distancing. So some of the goals of this webinar are going to be as follows. We want to provide you basic tools and techniques for conducting remote interviews from a high level. All of these techniques and best practices are going to be provided at a high level to make sure we reach as wide of an audience as possible. I know there may be nuances between public and private sector settings, and we want to make sure we reach as many people as possible. So it's mostly going to be basic tools. For the second point, we're sharing some best practices for interviewing and measuring candidates' ability. And this would apply to both remote and non-remote settings. These are mostly just best practices in how to measure human ability through selection tools like interviews. And for number 3, we want to assess some common security concerns that come with conducting online interviews and assessments, and some general guidance on how to best mitigate those security concerns. So the webinar topics that will be covered by our presenters today are these 4 as follows. We're going to cover equipment, software, and administration. We'll also cover standardizing administration in an effort to keep things fair and to observe best practices. We'll also discuss online interview question security. And lastly, we'll cover other assessment types that could be used in a remote setting. And with all that being said, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Jason Underwood, our first presenter.